Welcome back to A Little Bit of Cheese, your bite-sized Wisconsin sports podcast. I'm your host, Cody Depius. That's Sam Douglas. You can find us on both Spotify and on YouTube. As boring as a weekend as it is, we got a lot to talk about, as a lot of interesting stuff coming out of the NFC North, the Bucks, what's going on with the Brewers. We got it all right here. We'll start it off at the top here, and we'll talk about the NFC North. Last night, a really, I'll call it an interesting game. It was a good game in an entertainment standpoint, to say the least. But the Detroit Lions move up to 8-1 with a 26-23 victory over the Houston Texans. They were able to win on Jesse Bates' game-winning field goal. 5 interceptions for Jared Goff. A very shaky game for Detroit. They haven't seen this in the last, I think, 6 weeks. Jared Goff had almost been perfect, like an 85% completion rate, was looking as efficient as anybody had ever looked in the history of the NFL. They kind of ran into a little bit last night in Houston, but in the end, able to come up with a victory against a battered Texans team. Sam, I want to ask a couple of your thoughts and kind of what this means going forward for the NFC North as a whole.
I think Gutekunst had himself a heck of a day yesterday. I think he's pretty happy with how the NFC North is looking. Um, Look, I think a big thing from last night, got him, those kicks squeaked through by a little
Mm.
bit. I think I heard the commentary commentators said it's a good thing they didn't put an extra layer of paint on those field goal posts. That was electric game last night. I think we kind of saw the blueprint on how to take care of Detroit. This is kind of what I wanted to see the Packers going into, but making them play not their game. If you can make Jared Goff be a great quarterback, if you can get him down and make him force long throws, 15, 20 yards down the field. Look, he's a great system quarterback, 20 for 22 type of guy. Awesome numbers, completion percentage. Make him make big plays from the pocket. And I think seeing a way to beat Detroit is a huge takeaway from last night.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is to the fault of Houston, the fact that they could not execute on 5 interceptions.
Yeah.
More
Yeah.
so, you put the blame on them than you give Detroit credit, but you do have to give Detroit credit because they've only lost one game and we're 10 weeks through in the NFL season now. And somehow that team finds a way to stay resilient. But if you can find a way to make Goff feel uncomfortable, those bad throws will happen. They did not make him feel uncomfortable in the game that Green Bay played at Lambeau 2 weeks ago. And I think that's a big reason why that offense continued to stay efficient. A lot of that has to do with the pass rush and what you can do in your defensive coverages there. I see Sam is getting blinded by
It's wild.
the good sun there. But yeah, you have to find a way to just, yeah, exactly. Take them away from their game, play your own game, get them out of rhythm, and you'll see some off throws, which in the one game that Green Bay played, it doesn't look that bad. It's just a regular season game. But when it comes to, I'd say, even that game in Detroit coming on later in a couple of weeks here, that's going to be very important then. And then I'm assuming that these two teams meet in the playoffs eventually. So we haven't seen near enough of Detroit yet, and there is a way to beat these teams. Which, of course, it will come down to execution once you get those turnovers. But it's going to be getting Jordan Love and the offense into a rhythm, limiting the mistakes. That's the whole other side of the ball, which I'm not going to fault the Green Bay's defense too much for that game. I mean, you only gave up 17 points, but there are ways that you can be better, and it's to force a big turnover, change the momentum, and give the offense the ball back. And then that's going to be the bottom line when it comes down to that. Detroit's going to continue to stay scary. They have Zadarius Smith that's going to be coming on next week to bolster that pass rush a little bit. They're going to be the top team in the NFL, I think, when it comes down to it. And you're going to have to find a way to beat them. And you see that Jared Goff, that there are a couple holes in that game. He still is Jared Goff. The Jared Goff that we remember, there's still a little bit of a shell of him inside of that 85% completion rating through 5 weeks. He is still there. You can still find a way to beat him. Minnesota Vikings, a very sloppy game, but a win overall, 12-7 over Jacksonville. Another NFC North quarterback struggling with the interceptions as Sam Darnold had 3 of them. They had to win with the 4 field goals. I'm taking this more as Jacksonville and Mac Jones not being anywhere near what an NFL offense should be, and Minnesota just lucky to squeak away with a win.
Definitely lucky to squeak away with the win. 4 field goals, if that's going to win you a game against Jacksonville. Now, we didn't blow Jacksonville out either. So
Mhm.
that's something to be said there. Minnesota might have a little bit of a dynamic offense going on. It was good to see Hawkinson back in there. He was making plays. He's once he gets his legs back under him, he's going to open up a little bit for that offense. But having a close, low-scoring game against Jacksonville isn't going to take you far. I think Minnesota's kind of on the same trajectory, borderline playoff team, but nothing that you really need to be scared about going forward.
At 7-2, what do you think the playoff chances are? I think it's very interesting for Minnesota. Now they got a couple of easy weeks coming up here, but then they run into that NFC North gauntlet to end the rest of the season. What do you give them for a percentage chance right now after you watch that game, knowing where that offense is at? Because the defense has continued to play well throughout all of this, and that's essentially the reason that they won. So what do you kind of give for a chance of them? I'd say making the playoffs because I think we can throw the division out of the realm of possibility at this point.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to win the division. Lions are obviously just too good right now. They're going to have to close it out. I'm going to give them a good 65% chance to make the playoffs. 7-2 is nothing to sneeze at. I mean, they've set themselves up really well. You look on the other side of things where like the Bengals, we've talked about them before. They haven't set themselves up to perform well in the postseason with some of their early losses. Vikings absolutely did that. They took care of the wins that they needed to win so that they can have a chance in the postseason. Do I think that they're a threat when it's you gotta win it? No, I think there's just too many holes in that team. But they're 7-2 right now. They're gonna have to close it out because there's some teams playing well. You got Atlanta that's stringing together a bunch of wins. Shoot, Arizona's stringing together a bunch of wins, and we'll get into this in a little bit. But there's a lot of teams that are putting together a lot of wins. But at 7-2, the Vikings have done a lot for themselves to be in the playoff picture for sure.
Yeah, it's a pretty good cushion. They're go like the whole NFC North right now is going through the AFC South, which aside from Houston, everybody else is a pushover. So you can essentially pencil in 3 wins, and then you got to beat a Houston team that's pretty solid, which both Detroit and Green Bay have been able to. Actually, Minnesota has already too this year. Like Houston's going through the NFC North gauntlet, which you kind of feel for them because
That's
that's a
tough.
really solid team. But they're banged up. They're still really solid. They're going to be in the playoffs, and we'll see how far their season goes. But yeah, I think 65% is a pretty good shot. 7-2 is a really solid cushion. Like a lot of bad things have to happen in Minnesota for them not to make the playoffs, which
Am
it's
I?
still Minnesota, and it's definitely a possibility. So we'll keep an eye on that. But their road should be easy enough. 5 games over at 500 at this point. Like you would really have to hit a train. Like that's where they're at right now. So they have set themselves up. But Darnold, he's not the same guy that he was those first 5 weeks of the season, which we kind of expected that. Like we knew Sam Darnold was not going to stay that hot. And now you're kind of seeing the low point. No touchdowns on the day, 3 interceptions, just did not look comfortable at any point, which was kind of expected with, of course, Cam Robinson now starting at left tackle, not near the left tackle that Christian Darrisaw was. And they played a really good pass rush out of Jacksonville. So I kind of give
They
the
got to
reasons
get
as to that.
they got to get Jefferson the ball more. If
Mm.
they want to win, if they're not going to be, if they're in danger of scoring 12 points, Jefferson's got to be walking out of every game with 12 catches. I don't know what else is going on with them.
I like to hear that as a Justin Jefferson fantasy owner, and I 100% through-heartedly agree with that. Uh, the one NFC North team to lose this week is the Chicago Bears, and this is I kind of said it last week. If Chicago loses this game, there are a lot of conversations to be had about the coaching staff. This is not a New England team that should be beating them. Chicago is much more complete roster-wise, but they were not able to execute at all. The final score there 19-3. 3 points all day for Chicago offense, who has been abysmal as of late. How bad are things right now in Chicago?
19-3 to New England is garbage. That's so bad. You can't move the ball on what is a really bad defense and a really bad offense scoring 19 on you is on what should be your strength. Like they should be a defensive team. Look, they have zero offensive line. They have the receivers are supposed to be a strong suit. There's supposed to be a couple things. Caleb Williams is supposed to be mobile. He can't be mobile when he has zero time going in the pocket. It's collapsing on 4 different sides, from whether it's the center on one play, whether it's the left tackle or the right guard on another play. They're coming at him from all different angles. For a rookie quarterback, when do you sit him down for a couple games? I mean, like let him take a breath. We heard the Zach Wilson quote a couple years ago. He's seeing ghosts out there. I can't imagine what Caleb's
Mhm.
seeing out there because he's not seeing jack squat. That's what's going on. I don't know what he's seeing, but it's not an open Bears receiver. He's seeing a whole lot of defensive linemen in his face. Things are not good in Chicago, and something's got to change. It looks like it's coaching. It might be personnel. We saw them put a lot of money into skill position players this past off season, past year or two. Maybe they should have been bolstering up the trenches a little bit, but something's coming to bite them right now, and Chicago is still, a good 4 or 5 years away.
4 or 5 is a long time. I'd say 2 or 3, maybe. Maybe even next year they could turn things around. I mean, you draft a kid at the offensive line that can bolster a lot of things. But I think you hit the nail on the head. They gave up 9 sacks yesterday. They punted 8 times. They were 1 for 14 on third downs. Those are nightmare numbers. That is terrible. And I don't know how much blame you can even put on Caleb Williams because you're getting sacked 9 times like that like messes with your entire thought process, especially as a rookie quarterback that hasn't even played 10 games in the NFL. They didn't really give him a chance yesterday. I don't think Williams is the problem. I'm seeing all the Bears fans on social media. They're posting videos of Justin Fields throwing touchdown passes to DJ Moore last year.
I
I
love it.
find that hilarious because it's a totally different thing and a different conversation. But we kind of always knew that Matt Eberflus was not going to be the guy. Shane Waldron, as the offensive coordinator, is not the guy for Caleb Williams. That offensive line is not the offensive line that you need for a rookie quarterback at this point. Chicago, from here on out, they could lose to anybody in the NFL. You saw it yesterday. That New England team at one point this year, we were like, they might lose to everybody for the rest of the year, too. Like, they are one of the 3 worst teams in the NFL. I will say Drake May kind of looks like a guy. He's going to be a solid quarterback in this league. You're already seeing a little bit of that, which is kind of funny because you have Caleb Williams on the other side, who is the #1 overall. They bring in all those skill positions around him, and who's the one that can move the ball? Is it Drake May, who's playing with a bunch of guys who we haven't even heard of, or is it Caleb Williams playing with a bunch of superstars? Yesterday it was Drake May, and the Patriots able to take down the Chicago Bears, and the Bears taking on the Packers next week. We'll highlight that game a little bit more towards the end of the show, but things are bad in Chicago, and I don't see them turning around, at least for the rest of this season. So, Sam, you said you were doing your homework a little bit before. You've been kind of creating some storylines for what you're watching for the rest of the NFL season. This is right after that midway point, so I'm kind of excited to hear what you have for us.
Yeah, no cheese headery going on this week. The rest of the league's still in full function, and we hadn't had a really chance to talk about some of the big things going on in the NFL this year. And I just picked out three of what I think are some of the most interesting kind of storylines that we've been seeing throughout this year. First and foremost, we're going to start with the current MVP of the league. Where's Lamar putting himself in some of these all-time quarterback rankings? This is like we're watching him become. He was that dynamic in high school. We all saw the Twitter videos going around. He was that dynamic at Louisville. He comes in, he's about to win his third MVP. I'm not saying he's Brady or Mahomes, Peyton or Montana. Where's the conversation start with Steve Young, Dan Marino, Aaron Rodgers, Lamar Jackson? I think we're watching that happen.
All
Um,
of those guys that you brought up there, except for Dan Marino, which is kind of left out of that greatest conversation because of it, but they all have a ring. So for Lamar to ascend himself into one of those greatest conversations, you got to have the jewelry like that. That's what it is. And he has not been the guy to execute in the playoffs yet. One of the greatest regular season quarterbacks of all time, I think you can put him at this point. But what you're seeing him right now, of course, they always called him a running back. That was always the meme, just a running back that played the quarterback position. He is throwing the ball with so much touch rate. Like his throwing numbers by themselves are MVP worthy. And then you take into account what he's able to do on the ground. It's as dynamic as it gets. And I think Derrick Henry does get a lot of credit for that because you have to stack boxes when Derrick Henry is in the backfield. And Lamar Jackson has been taking advantage of it. So I think when it gets to the greatest conversation, at least get to a Super Bowl. With all those quarterbacks that you mentioned before, they have all been to a Super Bowl. Dan Marino was there, which I'm not saying it's easy for Lamar because you do have Patrick Mahomes in the AFC, but to get into that conversation, you got to get to the big one. That's kind of my answer for that. But yeah, you got to give him the credit where it's due at this point.
Just another one of those. It's a shame you're in the AFC when Patrick Mahomes also is in the AFC situation.
Just be
Um,
better. Just be better.
right? It must be, it sounds easy enough. I kind of touched on a little bit ago. There's a lot of teams with winning records that I'm frankly not afraid of right now. We've got teams like that aren't, Baltimore, Kansas City, Detroit. Obviously, I think I'm not sure if there's just a higher echelon or if I'm not scared of some of these 7-2 teams, 6-3 teams. Like, I mean, Pittsburgh's winning a bunch of games. Philly's winning a bunch of games. Minnesota, Denver, the Chargers. Heck, Arizona's putting together some wins. It feels like in a league with a bunch of parity that there's going to be a chunk of playoff teams that just, don't belong. And I'm not sure what's going on with theirs. We've got a lot of interesting record situation going on with how good we think these teams are. So I'm not sure what that's going to look like come playoff time, but there's a chunk of 6-3, 7-2 teams right now that I'm kind of shocked are there.
I think the dust is going to settle. I think Arizona will come down to earth. I think San Francisco with Christian McCaffrey is definitely going to be back in the mix. Tampa
Hmm.
Bay, I'm not going to take too much into account. I mean, they're playing the NFC South, which that's going to be a toss up between them and Atlanta. And I don't think either of those teams are in any contention for a Super Bowl at this point. In the AFC, I think Pittsburgh's interesting. I really do. I think Russell Wilson's playing well. He brings another dynamic to that team who is historically always has been and always will be a good defense. So if you have Russell Wilson finding a way to get George Pickens to shut his mouth and play really good football, that's how it happens. And that's what they've been doing. So there is a little, Pittsburgh could make a little bit of a run. I'm excited for those games against Baltimore coming up in just a little bit. But the dust will settle. The real teams will show up. Minnesota, we said they could really fall apart, or they could kind of hang on to their own these next couple of weeks, get their nine. They could very easily be 9-2 and then lose the rest of the way and still make the playoffs, because that's kind of the format of the playoffs at this point, and then anything can happen once you get in there, which the dust will settle, especially that second round of the playoffs. You're going to have the right teams there. I would assume that's usually the case, but I'm still concerned about San Francisco out in the West. But yeah, everyone's kind of jumbled up right now. I'm going to put Philly at the same category that I have Green Bay, just for the fact that both teams played healthy at the beginning of the year. Yes, it was a weird Brazil game, but I think those two teams are going to play a close game regardless of what the situation is. I think they're on a similar echelon. But yes, your top guys, it will be Kansas City, it will be Baltimore, it will be Detroit. It's just another NFC team is going to have to show up to really give Detroit competition when it comes down to the end of it.
I think we're setting up for a really exciting super wild card and wild card weekend where you're going to have some of these new teams like a Minnesota, San Francisco super wild card game. That it's just a really exciting, are we going to have Buffalo versus Pittsburgh? That sounds like an awesome first couple rounds of the playoffs is what we're looking at. Some of these teams that might not belong, but let's find out. Last storyline that I've been talking about this a little bit. Nobody wants to see the Bengals in the playoffs. They keep losing. But Cody, this is a good team. Joe Burrow, if you give him one game, one shot, they played a darn good game against the Chiefs. They, should have gone to Jamar for a 2-point conversion at the end of the game against Baltimore. And you swing that team 2 wins. I think they go 4-6 to 6-4 with 2 big wins. What's going on in Cincinnati? If they can string together some wins, this team looks really, really good. The defense did it for a little bit against Baltimore. It feels like they're just a click away from quoting Aaron Rodgers, running the table here and doing something special. I've got a big ol' eye on the Bengals right now.
You had it. It's the defense. And even against Baltimore, you say they did it a little bit. I think the little bit was maybe like 3 drives that they kind of did it. Like, that defense is their problem right now. Joe Burrow is playing at an MVP caliber level. Jamar Chase is up there for the conversation, the best receiver in the league. In my opinion, they need to go sign him immediately, because he is never going to be cheaper than he is right now. And he just came off of a 200-yard performance. Those two are playing their kind of dynasty year right now. But it stinks for them because their defense couldn't keep water out of a boat. Like, it's really, really bad. And once they figure things out there, they're dangerous. But I'll always say it and I'll always live by it. Defense wins championships. You give all these Super Bowls to Patrick Mahomes. Every Patrick Mahomes Super Bowl has had a top five defense. That Kansas City defense is the reason that they continuously make their way there. Yes, they have it figured out on offense, but a team takes both sides of the ball. And that's their big problem. And until we see them show up, which they've had a bunch of opportunities to, they just haven't. You can't give up 35 points and expect to win more games than not. That's
Would have
the bottom line when it comes to it.
I would have loved to see him go after Lattimore. That the Saints ended up trading to Washington. I think that could have been a great fit in Cincinnati, actually.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. There's the NFL trade deadline's so weird. Like teams just like to hold on to their pieces, even though it would probably benefit them to tear down and rebuild. But that's just not the way that the NFL works, which a lot of that has to do with contracts and all that, which is the reason that you see Preston Smith go out of Green Bay was essentially to dump all that contract money. If it wasn't for that, I don't think they make that deal. I think they stick with their guy. But Pittsburgh, they're willing to eat up that money a couple years down the road. So a good trade for both sides on that end, but that's kind of the reason for it. And Cincinnati just needs to pick things up, and then they'll be right there. They got their quarterback who's playing at a Hall of Fame level. They have that top end receiver, and the offense is playing well. I like what they do in the run game as well. Like that's a good team on one side of the ball, and the reason for where they're at right now. We'll switch gears now, as this is kind of my headline prediction from last week. But the Bucks are at 2-8. They were able to take down Utah. A game where they were ahead of Boston yesterday. They ultimately lost that one 113 to 107. Giannis had 43 points and 13 rebounds in that game. They found a way to lost it. And they played New York on Friday, and that's a game with not many positives at all. 116 to 94, the final score there. And Dame in both of those games was 0 for 4 from 3 and 1 for 8 from 3. 1 for 12 is not going to do it for the guy you need knocking down those shots. Sam, I want your overall take here of what's going on in Milwaukee and kind of how these things turn around.
I believe in the Bucks. We're fine. I think I like the 2-8 Bucks a lot better than I liked the 1-4 Bucks. I think we're fine. I think there's got to be a couple tweaks going on. I like what we're doing. We're giving some younger guys some minutes. Ryan Rollins played a decent game. I think he's got a little bit of growing to do. We saw Andre Jackson take a start against Utah, and that's a game that we won. He wasn't very offensively aggressive when we played the Knicks, but hey, we knew that we were going to play a couple tough games this week. And we played Boston really, really well. Mm-hmm. That Boston team is so good defensively. When you're looking at their three guards, and Dame was trying to get open, I'm not faulting Dame for his missed shots because he was getting them up. But when you're trying to get switches and you've got Drew Holiday and then you get a switch and it's Derek White and then you get a switch and it's Jaylen Brown and all these guys are just defensive dogs, I don't get like the guard play against Boston will be trouble all year long. Boston is really good. And they're well coached. There's got to be some tweaks on the coaching staff of this Bucks. You saw it against New York. Whether you love or hate Tibbs, at least they have an identity. We don't have an identity on offense. I don't know what we're doing. There doesn't seem to be a direction. There was a couple, it was back-to-back plays in the game against Boston I saw that really showed what's going on with Docker is and where this coaching staff is our leadership. The Bucks had it was a bad call against Giannis. He got elbowed by Jaylen Brown, and Doc is all upset about it. Now they ended up upgrading to a flagrant. And then I think 2 plays later, Giannis fell with the ball. It should have been called a travel, but it wasn't. And instead of arguing the call, Joe Mazzulla calls up a play to get a wide open Al Horford. And that's just 2 angles of seeing when something goes wrong, are you going to complain about a call or are you locked in calling the next play for your offense? And I think that's the epitome of the coaching issues of the Bucks. There's just a little bit of a lack of focus, but we're fine. We're fine. Bobby's got to take a step back a little bit. It's not all about him. We need some sort of identity on offense. We're playing some of the young guys. AJ Green's a stud. Andre Jackson needs a little bit more minutes. We got a really easy schedule coming up. I got our games coming up. We got Toronto, Detroit, Charlotte, Houston, Chicago, tough game against Indiana, then Charlotte, Miami, Washington, Detroit. We got 10 games. We're sitting at 2-8. We're not 2-15 or anything like that. We're gonna string together some wins. We might end up like 6-10 or 7-10 or something like that. the Bucks are fine. We got some wins to do. Giannis is putting up MVP numbers, 43 of 13, 31 16, 34 16 and 9, 37 and 11. The guy Giannis is here. He's playing, and as long as he's doing his thing, Dame's going to hit shots. We're not going to be playing against Boston every night. Bucks are fine.
You talk about Dame and the shots, which you can't fault a 3-point shooter for missing 3-pointers. Like it's going to happen. You're not always going to shoot at a high clip. What was he, 10 for 15 the one night? You go 10 for 15 one night, you can go 0 for 4 and 1 for 8 in back-to-back games. That does happen. But I do want to know what your answer is to how do you work around the absence of Damian Lillard on defense? Like there is no push at all. Anyone can blow by him. He's giving up so many points and allowing point guards to do essentially whatever they want to do is kind of my takeaway on this. How do you kind of try to combat that? Because I haven't seen a lot of defensive help from the other guards either.
We're not going to be the biggest defensive team out there, and some of our wins are going to have to come on the offensive side. We saw Indiana do it last year. Now we can't just forgo the defensive side. You've got two of the best help defenders in the league. So Dame's got to play tight on the ball, and they will hunt him. Jaylen Brown was hunting him yesterday. Every time that Boston was bringing it down the floor in the last 5 minutes, they were getting the switch. They were getting Dame on the ball. Even the Knicks game, I came home and watched the rerun of that. After work one night, they're hunting Damian Lillard, and he is a liability. If he can stay tight up top, he doesn't have to worry about helping down low. Just be better about rotations. And some of that means getting rid of Bobby Portis. He doesn't rotate well. Sometimes his attention is here and there. He can't guard the two and the three guys that we think he can. He's long enough to take care of a one on the perimeter sometimes. Bobby doesn't rotate that well. We've got to be better aggressively defensive rotating. Because having Brook and Giannis behind you, you can have a Dame up top if you have Brook and Giannis behind you. That should be fine. And once Chris comes back, that's another lanky wing that knows how to play smart defense that can rotate a little bit. But I think it comes down to rotations. I don't think he's never been a defensive stud. Never. That's not what he's here for. So I'm not super worried about it, but the other guys do have to pick up the slack a little bit. And Gary Trent Jr., you heard the Dan Campbell interview yesterday. Got to get turnovers. It's not going to happen every single stop. We're not like that. You just got to make a couple big plays. Add 3 more steals a game. That's momentum. It's small stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think Chris Middleton, when he comes back, is going to help offensively as well. Because right now, there's not someone that you trust to take a mid-range shot. Where Chris Middleton's one of the best mid-range shooters of all time. He's going to help a lot in that sense, and then on the defensive side as well. But there's always the conversation. Yes, it's great to have him, but having a guy at that age, that you're not going to have him all the time, especially with the health concerns. So, like, Chris might not be there in the playoffs. They're going to have to find a way to play with a roster when you're missing some guys. Like, maybe what if Giannis goes out? And if Giannis is off of this team right now, like, these blowout losses would be, like, really bad, really embarrassing. Like, Giannis bringing the most value that anyone could ever bring to a 2-8 team, I think, at this point. 43 points and 13 rebounds, and they can't hang in there. Well, at the end of it, they had the big lead against Boston, a 17-point lead that they blew. Like, it just fell apart. And I kind of felt it when I turned it on is when they were up 17, and then I started seeing that dwindle a little bit, and things started getting a little bit sour. But it's a long season. There's a reason there's 82 games.
I got one more note on the Bucks that I had written down. I talked about trading Bobby a couple times. I want to make it clear it's not because he's a bad player. Bobby has had a couple decent games in a row. He's not a bad player. He doesn't fit. And that's what we're looking at with these Bucks. We just need rhythm. We need flow. And Bobby doesn't fit that flow. I love Bobby Portis so much. He's just the system doesn't match him anymore. He's a good player, and we should get good value from him. And if we're not getting good value, maybe that's why he's not getting traded. But Bobby's got to go because he doesn't fit.
I agree wholeheartedly. He's not someone who's helping out this team more than he hurts it. My strict opinion there. We'll move on now to everybody's favorite segment, and that is the cheese grater. I have 3 questions for you, Sam. So we'll kind of rattle these off. Number 1 question I have for you is, how crucial is a Bears win for Green Bay next week?
Crucial enough. I don't think we're here to win the division. I would love to see it just for the vibes. We've been owning Chicago for a while, so let's keep doing it. For the vibes, I'll give it a 7.5, 8 out of 10. I don't think
All
it's a
right.
season-changing game for us. You asked me this a little bit ago. I'm going to phrase it a little bit differently. Is Aaron Rodgers washed?
He's definitely not the Aaron Rodgers he was. He's not an Aaron Rodgers that can win a Super Bowl and put the team on his back anymore. And there's a lot more problems in New York than just Aaron Rodgers, of course, but he's not the guy that can put a team on his back anymore. So he's not going to be that guy that takes him to the Super Bowl. They need their defense to play lights out, and they haven't been. So there's been too many games this year that they have put up single digit scores, and you can't do that in this NFL. So, yeah, I think that would answer the question too. He is washed. He can play good football. We've seen him play good football too this year, but it hasn't been consistent and it hasn't been a takeover kind of year for Aaron Rodgers. I don't know how capable he is of that anymore at this point. What is the biggest need for change for the Milwaukee Bucks? Just one thing that you would do to help turn this season around, aside from the easy schedule. Like when it comes to the mentality. I know you already gave a couple of answers to this. What is your biggest need for change?
Bobby's got to go. Got getting the right piece for Bobby, and it's not just because, like I said, Bobby's a good player, and when Chris comes back, we have a good team. We got to get somebody that fits, and we've seen the Bucks take a couple of swings in midseason before. I think Horst will. He had a really petty delay of game, technical foul in a big moment yesterday too. It just seems like he feels like the game is about him. When we need a role player, we don't need another alpha out there. So getting a right role player for Bobby Portis or two role players for Bobby Portis, that's the biggest Bucks move.
Yeah, yeah.
Russ is cooking. Is he a Hall of Famer?
Yes, I think so. Longevity. I feel like his career is going to find a little bit of a resurgence. Things were bad in Denver, and that gives everybody this idea that Russell Wilson was not a good quarterback. He was in a terrible, terrible system and actually played really well last year, but Denver as a team was bad. So he moves on to a solid team with Pittsburgh. Now you're going to see a resurgence. Russ is a good quarterback. He has the Super Bowl ring. He went to another, should have won the other one. That's a whole different conversation, but he will be a Hall of Famer. I think the longevity is going to be there. He's won a lot of football games and he's been doing it for a long time. So I think yes is the answer to that. You think so?
If he needs another couple years,
Yeah.
I kind of have him in the boat with Eli Manning, where hey, you can win a lot of games and you can be a good top seven quarterback for a while, maybe top eight quarterback for a while. To me, does that make you a Hall of Famer? I would prefer to say no. I get the precedence that quarterbacks have, though. But I don't think that he single-handedly dominated the NFL. What a Hall of Fame player should have for that long. I don't know. He was
No,
cool
that's fair.
a little bit.
Well, I will say Eli's going to be a Hall of Famer, and he shouldn't
Well,
be, but he will be.
he
So
will be.
that's kind of an answer that would add to that. The best case scenario for the Badgers against Oregon. Make it realistic.
Can I say score 10? It's,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think
I
that's
think
fair.
get double digits on the board and keep them under 50. I think a 45-10 game we're having fun in Madison. This is not going to go well. They're the number one team in the country. I think have fun, do something good. If you can have one good play, get a little sports center and like a nice one-handed pick or a big hit. I don't care if it's after the whistle. Give the fans something that they showed up that they paid for the ticket for. It's not going to go well, but let's have fun.
Fair enough.
I think there's two dominant teams in the NFL right now. If the Super Bowl was next week, who you got, Lions or Chiefs?
Detroit. Kansas City has gotten through by the skin of their teeth in so many of these games. It took a blocked field goal against Denver. No, I don't want to hear that. I don't want to see it. Detroit's a better team. Like overall, Kansas City has not found a rhythm. They haven't looked good in any of these wins. There has not been a point where you watch the Kansas City Chiefs this year and you just say, oh man, they're so good. They're so good. It's how are they losing this? And then at the end, they somehow find a way to win it. Like it's gross. I hate watching Chiefs football right now where we have seen Detroit be dominant this year. I am taking the Lions. They are very scary. Yesterday was a sloppy game. They threw 5 interceptions, but somehow found a way to win. It feels like every game for Kansas City has been like, oh, they really played bad, but somehow they found a way to win. Like that's my bottom line. You got the same answer there?
I saw a little breakdown. No, I'm taking Kansas City. I think,
Ugh.
winners win, and that's what they're doing. I saw a breakdown from Dan Orlovsky, actually. They were targeting that left tackle on the blocked kick. They saw him fall over a couple times during the game, and then they overloaded him on the last play. I think that's a small thing that good teams do is they find the one weakness in your field goal kicking protection and they exploited it, and that's what won them the game. If it's offense, defense, or special teams, because you can find the one bad player, that's beautiful football.
I mean, if I was gonna bet, yes, I'd bet on Kansas City, but I'm definitely rooting for Detroit. My mind and everything that is logical tells me that it should be Detroit. So that's my answer with that, and I'm gonna stick with it. The headline prediction for this week, I had the Bucks at 2-8 coming into today, and Doc Rivers coming into question. I don't think Doc Rivers is into question, but the team is 2-8, and things do
Mhm.
not look good right now in Milwaukee. So I'm going to take another win there on the headline. And when it comes to next week, I have a positive headline coming now. Jordan Love secures sole proprietor ownership of the Bears. He fires Matt Eberflus and Shane Waldron.
I love it. That's great. I love it. I think that's the best headline yet. Hey, read it and weep. Jaden Reed, big game. Packers take down Chicago. New ownership in town. I love it.
Yeah, this Bears team is really bad. And the reason I brought up the question before asking how crucial it was, where he said this isn't a season changing game, if
Mhm.
they lose this game, it looks really bad. You cannot lose this game to Chicago, which I think that's a whole morale thing. Like they just don't do that. I don't expect them to.
Sure.
Like it shouldn't happen at all. I think Green Bay has a 95% chance to win this game. But that 5% chance that they lose this game, I think a lot of things start looking bad because there are negative conversations around Jordan Love right now. And if they find a way to lose that game, those are only going to inflate, I think, in my opinion. Do you have any final thoughts for the audience before we kick off the rest of our Monday afternoon?
Well, I love that. Just got one brief shot. I didn't talk much Brew Crew today. Shout out Bryce Turang getting that platinum glove. You love to see that
Yeah,
in Milwaukee. I think that's pretty cool.
well deserved. Absolutely. It was actually said by Pat Murphy that there's a chance that Bryce Turang goes to shortstop, but that he really doesn't want to do that because he's the best second baseman he's ever seen. And I agree with that. And I think either shortstop or third base is going to be a big thing that Milwaukee's looking towards. We would touch on it a little bit more. We're running out of time today, so we'll hit that topic as we move along here. But I'm Cody Depius. That's Sam Douglas. We want to thank you for being here with us once again today. We'll be back later this week, hopefully on Thursday, for another edition of A Little Bit of Cheese, your bite-sized Wisconsin sports podcast.